Hello and welcome to another episode of Mixtape. I'm Fatma, and today my guest is Mehr Husain, and we are going to talk about all things publishing, books, and how interviewing a good interview can be a form of storytelling. Hello and welcome, Mehr.
Hi, Fatima. Thank you so much for having me on here on Mixtape. It's wonderful to be here.
So let's just dive in. And my first, discussion point would be focused on the fact कि how interviewing is a good form of storytelling because आपका एक journalistic experience है, and just taking from that and the fact that in today's day and age everybody is focused on clickbait, everybody has sort of I don't know social media. I think we can't just only blame social media. I think it's the generic laziness of our minds because human mind is capable of a lot of things, and it's upon us that we use blame a tool that it's shortening our attention span and not using any self control or anything on it. So just share on how in your professional career interviewing has been a form of storytelling for you.
Yes, absolutely, Fatima. I started in the media way back in 2007, so not so long ago, but I mean, way before the digital age that we now know took over. And one of the first lessons that I learned when it came to interviews was that it's people love stories in every form, in every whether they're written, whether they're in a film format, or whether they're a video, or whether even if it's a cartoon. People love stories. Stories are a form of entertainment. They're a source of information, and most importantly, stories really help people connect. I always tell people that whenever you're writing your reports, your profiles, your case studies, always throw in a story, because you can give people all the facts and figures you want, all the numbers you want, but nothing is going to drive the point home unless there's a story, and that too with a human element. Because ultimately, as human beings, why do we enjoy stories so much? It's because it's a sense of escape. It's a sense of wonder. From childhood to adulthood to even, as a consumer, as a storyteller, the goal is always to not just give a message, but also form a connection with who your consumer is or who your reader is, right? So very early on, I remember this was, I think, one of the earliest lessons that I learned was when I was reading an article someplace, and I think it was Pink Floyd, or some rock band. I think it was Pink Floyd, and one of the band members had this habit that whenever the interviewer would come in, they'd be very nervous. Obviously, you're interviewing a wildly popular rock band. So one of the things that this band member would do was he would make the interviewer, the journalist, whoever it was, reporter, sit down and ask them, what's your favorite color? And I thought this is such a wonderful way, because you're immediately making a personal connection. And I have always, in everything, and no matter what field or what topic I'm writing on, when it comes to interviews, I always try to create a personal connection. I mean, I have a personal connection with you, and it varies. I have a personal connection with other people. It's something that I feel that when you, I mean, there was this very infamous ad of, you may not know this movie, आप अभी जवान हो, हम बुड्ढों को तो याद है, E.T. And E.T. की वो एक बड़ी मजेदार एक ad थी where there's a finger coming. It was a telephone ad, a telephone company, British Telecom, BT. And so they show a human finger going up from Earth, and they show E.T.'s finger coming down. And then the two fingers meet in the middle of the screen, and then, the Chand piche bana hua tha and British Telecom wala tha. It was a brilliant ad. And I think that once you make that connection with someone, then you are already establishing trust, which is an integral part for any interview, any profile that you do. If the person doesn't feel comfortable, if they don't feel like they can trust you, then you need to really rethink what your strategy is.
So, moving on from the fact, obviously, it's very important that you have, you lay this basic established rule that the person you are interviewing is comfortable enough to share what you are asking, and even if, and to the extent that if they are not comfortable in answering something that they don't want to be put out, they can tell you in a nice way that this is not what they want to respond to, and then you should also have the courtesy of sort of not following for the clickbait thing. So
Yes,
so keeping that,
absolutely.
keeping this
इसमें
in,
research का बहुत important है element.
yeah, yeah,
आपको
and
research करनी चाहिए, which you never ever walk into an interview thinking, oh, I'll just swing it. No
yeah,
one is that good. No one on
yeah,
this planet is that good.
yeah.
Do
and
your research always.
I think research also helps, and this has been my experience because I think repeated this a couple of times. I'm not a trained journalist by education, so I've sort of stumbled upon this field or the semi field of sorts by accident, and by the fact that, again, there was has always been interest on my part for storytelling, be it writing or be it photography, and उस तरह का case है. So
Sure.
research has always helped me come up with questions, and like there have been incidents where I've been involved. You also know that I've been involved in the side projects for some time now, and even at times some professional people have asked, how did you got this answer? And I was like, it's online, available online, and it was already said, that person had already said XYZ somewhere. I just added on that fact, and I've received at
Yeah.
times very surprised reaction, and I was like, aren't you a trained person? Isn't this something you should already know? So just uh, say that, share what your experience has been, that why we are seeing a deterioration on the professional side when it comes to interviewing, where mostly, no matter how senior the person
Yeah.
is, how experienced the person is, whenever we see these sort of interviews, they come across very shallow. They don't add anything of value, additional value, other than the fact कि अगर कोई, for example, एक बड़ा कोई interview hype होता है, किसी XYZ is going to interview this celebrity or this politician, and blah blah blah. But if you just if you look at that interview, it has the same stuff that you have heard multiple times, yeah, stuff that you can just Google, and वो बेशक Wikipedia के पहली 4-5 लाइनों में वो चीजें उस बंदे के बारे
हाँ
में होंगी.
हाँ
So
बिल्कुल.
where did we went wrong? And this is not just a Pakistani thing. I'm seeing this
Yeah.
trend, I think, globally. बड़ी publications जो हैं, they're sort of turning into gossip sites, and gossip sites
Sure.
alone. So where do you see
Yeah.
what's your viewpoint on how the deterioration happened?
Fatima, I think initially, when I started out as a journalist and I didn't receive any formal training as well, I literally learned. I walked into a newspaper. I was handed a newspaper to run because the previous editor had resigned, and I learned everything by myself. Honestly, I just sat there thinking, what do I do? And I had this, and I think one of the greatest lessons that I learned was that when you are going into an interview, when you are going to profile someone, you cannot put your limits. You're not there to ask them to prove what you already know. You're there to discover something new, and you're there to give them a platform. What I see now, especially on social media platforms, is I see there are several factors. I see young people asking the same questions again that the interviewees have already covered, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've not the person conducting the interview has not done their research, or they want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth for themselves for whatever reasons I don't know. It's not a scoop. It's not an expose. It's not new. Then there's also the culture of commercialization. When people are trying to get people, interviewees to say things that they know is going to get them hits or clicks or brand endorsements. And those are not profiles. Those are PR pieces. I think we need to be very, very clear about this, that there's a very distinct difference between a PR piece, a PR stunt, more like a marketing gimmick, or a profile. There are some very good profiles out there, but I think that if somebody wants to profile someone, somebody wants to interview a person, then you must be open to whatever they have to say. And you must learn to respect that person in their entirety. You cannot cherry pick it. Oh, okay, so-and-so person dropped so-and-so brand's name. We have to put that in. And then so-and-so person made this statement about the environment. How boring. Take that out. You can't do that. A profile is meant to be wholesome. A profile is meant to show a person with all their good points and their flaws as well, because ultimately we're all human.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, then yes, you will end up with shallow pieces, and you're not going to have something that's going to connect with your consumer.
And I think this also is adding to this fact of sort of, specifically when it comes to people who are public figures, putting them into the positive or the negative boxes. Like somebody, because the profiles are done in such a way that the audience is made to either love somebody irrespective of their flaws, and then when something comes out, it's just like bang on, everybody starts hating on that person. Or otherwise, there are people who are made to be seen as the demons
I don't
and all
consider
things
these
that were wrong.
profiles.
Yeah.
A profile is not meant to cause polarization. A profile is there for people to see someone, to learn something about their journey, to understand how they got to where they got to, and to inspire others, and to create a connection. If your profile that you have conducted, if the interview that you have conducted just portrays someone as someone that you either love or you hate, then that is a failure. That's not a profile. That cannot be categorized as a profile. That's just a marketing gimmick. That's it.
So in some interviews that you have done, and you have sort of recently published a very unique book, and we will get into that. But before that, before we discuss that book and the content of that book, and some very interesting profiles that you have done for that. Before that, before in other your profiling, I don't know, career or journalistic career, can you share some interesting interviews that you have done, or some interesting interviews or profiles that you went into and you didn't expect a story that you got to know about a person, or a person shared that you were it sort of
Absolutely.
totally blew your mind out, or
Absolutely.
something like that?
Yeah, there are several of them that come to mind. One of my most cherished memories, and a profile which I feel went unnoticed, not because it was written by me, but because of who the person was of the late Colonel Amjad Hussain, Sayyid Amjad Hussain. This was someone who had been part of the Pakistan movement, and he had worked alongside Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And he was, his son had actually asked me that, look, my father is very old, and would you be interested in speaking to him about his time with Jinnah? And I was shocked. I said, what? We actually have someone who's part of the Pakistan movement and nobody's spoken about it? This is ridiculous. Interestingly, I had met him before several times, but I never knew who he was. And that just goes to show how necessary it is. You don't know who someone is if you actually make a connection with them. We'd never gone beyond the usual salam, salam. And when I sat down, I just gave him, I said, ji aap apni kahani bataएं. That's it. That's all I said. I said, ji aap mujhe apni kahani bataएं. And I think, Fatima, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life to hear a man to actually relive the entire partition movement, for him to tell me personal anecdotes about Jinnah. And then it also broke my heart, because when we were concluding the interview, and there were moments of laughter and moments of exasperation and moments of joy, and very interesting insights into how things were pre-partition, how the divisions between Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs were created. But towards the end, when, now we were talking about post-partition and what Pakistan had become, he broke down and he sobbed his heart out. He sobbed, an old man in his 90s, sobbing his heart out. And I'll never forget the way he said, ye Pakistan, ye mulk hai. Ye Pakistan, humne to nahi banaya tha, ye mulk, ye aap logon ne banaya hai. And I remember his caretaker had to step in at one point and ask me, ki ji, aap rok dein. But to my surprise, I was crying myself because I knew what he meant. The two of us, I'm certain the caretaker at that point must have been like, ye baji kya kar rahi hain? But the fact was that here's someone who's from my great-grandfather's generation, perhaps my grandfather's generation as well. And here I am, and the two of us are crying over the fact at the state of the country. That was our bond. I mean, how sad is that? Yeah. How sad is that? A great man. And he had done so much for the country, and he left weeping and crying. That was one that really drove home the point that I will never, ever, ever limit anyone. Because on some level, I felt privileged enough to know that I had tapped into this man's emotions where he felt comfortable enough to cry in front of me. On the other hand, I realized how important it is to get to the raw element in any profile that you do, to get to the core of a person, to strip away those layers of professionalism, those layers of how did you get to where you got to, the usual tropes, and to get down to the real story. So that was one. Then another one that I will always cherish is when I interviewed Sheila Reddy, the author of Mr. and Mrs. Jinnah. I had read her book, and when I emailed her about, booking a slot for an interview, I just kept it real. I didn't say, oh, thank you so much for writing this lovely, wonderful, absolutely gorgeous, beautifully written book. I just went beyond that. I said, can I just tell you something? I love Rati, and I think she's fabulous. And I sent her this very heartfelt email, which I now look back, I probably didn't even stop for any punctuation. I just poured my heart out. And I said, look, I want to talk to you about this book. And she responded in the warmest way. She was like, you know what, this feedback means so much to me. And the interview that I conducted, this was for Dawn. It's one of the best interviews ever for me because of how open Sheila was. And Sheila was open because we'd made that personal connection. Of course, feedback, formal feedback, professional feedback is necessary. But when I finished the book, I realized the magnitude of it. I mean, it's just remarkable. The book in itself is remarkable. It's a work of art. Yeah. And I thought, of course she's going to know this. Then I want to tell her how I feel about it, what I felt. Then another interview that I conducted was Anita Anand, who had written about Maharaja Dalip Singh's daughter, Princess Sophia, who was Queen Victoria's goddaughter and the first colored suffragette. And with Anita as well, I met Anita at a literary festival in Lahore. And when I started reading this book, I connected with it on a different level, having grown up in the West as a brown female, as a South Asian, as a Pakistani, as a minority member. And that was the angle that I took when I wrote to Anita to ask her if she could grant me an interview, because I said, you know, this, what Princess Sophia did from back then, it connects with me now. It resonates with me now. And she was a fighter. She had everything to lose, and yet she fought. And Anita as well connected on that level, because she said, I said, how did you even find this story? And she said, you know, I was just flicking through some magazines at home. I was bored at home, and suddenly I saw this lady, this picture of the suffragettes, and I looked at this lady and I thought, oh, she looks like my aunt. Anita is Indian as well. And so immediately we were like, look at this. We look for stories for women that are about our aunts and uncles. It doesn't get more Asian than that, right? It just doesn't. You'll never hear William Dalrymple say, "Oh, I decided to write about so and so because he resembled one of my uncles." You just won't hear it.
Yeah,
So
this is
that was
very
a great one. And then and recently for the fashion book, there were so many colorful profiles, but you know, I think three will always stick with me. One is Tariq Amin, because
yeah,
of how open Tariq Amin
yeah,
was about the entire thing. Often you find that you might try to, and I found myself in this situation where you're conducting an interview and the interviewee isn't giving you very much. They're giving you the standard, yes, no, bachpan se shauk tha, bas,
standard answer.
the worst answer you can get, bas.
Yeah,
In those situations, I would suggest that if it's not working, change the topic and then
yeah,
go back to it. Um, there have been a couple of instances where an interview has just gone disastrously so badly because it's been so boring. But I think that's also a failure on both parties.
yeah,
On my part, I've not been able to break the ice, which I
yeah,
should have done so beforehand. And on part of the interviewees, I think it's their failure to be able to trust me because they're scared. And fear is very much a part of our national psyche, unfortunately. But going back, Tariq Amin, when I started writing this book, I said this to each and every single person. Every single person. I started off with them. I said, look, I'm writing a book on the fashion industry, and I want to know your story, and I want us to be friends. I said this to every single person. I said, I'm coming to you in a spirit of friendship, and I want us to be friends. I want us to walk down memory lane together. And when they would ask me, well, why? Why would I want to be friends with you? Why would I want to do that with you? My answer was like, well, because you were doing the work that I was consuming. So we already have a relationship there. And that made them feel wanted. Do you know what I mean? That made them, I wasn't there to get something out of them and then just leave. I wasn't using them, but I wanted them for who they were. And that feeling to be desired is a wonderful thing that you can give to anyone. That I want you for who you are, not for what you can do for me. So Tariq Amin was a very, very wonderful interview. Then there was Asif Raza, the photographer, the father of photography in Pakistan. All of Pakistan should be thanking him when they put their pictures up on Instagram. Asif Raza was interesting because when I started interviewing him, almost immediately the story that he told, I was like, ye to meri kahani hai. He was like, I was this young graduate, I came back from Canada, back to Pakistan, and I wanted to do photography, and my family was like, what?
yeah.
Photography? And I sat there thinking, oh, this sounds familiar. When I left a job in banking in London, I came back, and I remember walking to the house and saying, so I'll be working at a newspaper, and my parents were like, no one's done that.
Yeah.
And no one's going to do that. And I was like, yeah, no, someone is going to do that.
पढ़ाई के पैसे जाया कर दिए आपने.
पढ़ाई के पैसे जाया कर दिए. So Asif Raza's story was very special to me because it was also a story about someone who went against the grain. And I think that that's one of the reasons why people have loved his profile. And they've been like in awe कि हमें पता भी नहीं था कि ये इस तरह का काम कर सकते हुआ पाकिस्तान में, was because here was someone like Tariq Amin who's just decided, you know what, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And if you can get that message across to your readers, the profile is meant to empower your reader. It's not meant to empower you or your establishment or anything. It's meant to empower the reader. And then the final profile that meant so much to me was, I love them all, but these are the ones that I really felt connected with on a personal level, was Seher Segal's story. Now, Seher Segal, you think empire, queen of the fashion industry and everything. But what I loved was that this I conducted with her in her house. She had invited me into her home, and I was deeply honored because I know, for me personally, a home is a personal sanctity. It's your shelter. It's where you bear off everything. And if you invite someone into your home, I do consider it a great honor, especially if it's for work. So immediately I thought, okay, here's someone who is showing me this magnanimous gesture of trust. She's invited me into her home, into her personal space. And I will always remain grateful to her for that. And during the course of the interview, I said, "तुझी आप मुझे लिबास की कहानी बताएं जो आपने fashion magazine, the Vogue of South Asia, जो आपने वो शुरू किया था." And she looked at me, and I remember she was having a bowl of soup. She looked at me and she said, I was standing outside W.H. Smith's. आपको पता है ना W.H. Smith's का? And I was like, is she for real? Is she having a laugh? Is she really trying to make me feel comfortable? Ki, W.H. Smith's stationery ki dukaan. And I was like, and this is in London, by the way. And I was like, she and I was like, nahi, Seher. And she insisted कि आपने मुझे Seher बुलाना. I said, नहीं Seher, आप मुझे बताएं आपने लिबास कैसे शुरू किया था? And she was like, हाँ, तो मैं W.H. Smith के दफ्तर के बाहर खड़ी हुई थी. इतनी सर्दी थी. It was so cold, and I was standing outside waiting for an appointment with the manager, and I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, are you for real? And she was just so calm about it. She was like, well, yes, what were you expecting? And that's when it hit me that
moment.
The greatest thing that you can do in a profile is show people that ultimately it's the ordinary that makes a difference. Yeah. It's the ordinary that counts.
Yeah.
It's not about the glitz. It's not about the glamour. If you get that, well and good, but that's a byproduct. That is not the goal. And this was something that was evident even for people like the magazine founder, Ashad Tareen, who founded Pakistan's first men's magazine. He wasn't in it for the fun, the glitz, the glamour, the parties, or, anything of the sort. He was in it because he wanted to do some creative work.
Yeah.
He just wanted to do some creative work. And I think these stories, why people have loved the book so much, it's not because of me or because of Saad, my co-author, or because of anything, but the fact that these were stories of people who were just ordinary, आम लोग जिन्होंने अच्छा काम किया था और उन्होंने अपनी कहानी बताई है इतने फख्र से. They've told their stories with so much pride. I mean, I love the fact that Tariq Amin admittedly said that, I used to be a jharu boy. I'd love to know any makeup artist now who would actually say that.
Admit that, yeah.
I love the fact that who would admit that. Yes, who would admit that? I love the fact that Fifi Haroon, whose family, owned Dawn, Herald, everything. Fifi Haroon just turned around one day and said, you know what? I'm fed up of this. I'm going to go do my own thing. How many women will actually turn around and say that today without fearing a backlash?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And I said, yaar, who कौन कहेगा कि यार हम खड़े हुए थे अपॉइंटमेंट के लिए मैनेजर के पास, कौन कहेगा? Nobody says it. Nobody wants to own it.
And these, I think, when these sort of things come out in profiles, this has also been my personal experience, that these are the stories that, sort of connect, because कुछ चीज जब establish हो जाती है, कुछ चीज, when something, becomes a big thing and something that everybody is looking up to, and if you sort of try to get to its roots, and there's always a glossed out version that people sort of generally promote, there was a light bulb moment when, or somebody was, and generally people think, oh, there is only a set group of people who can do amazing things because they have the environment, they have this thinking room that they can go, a specialized study or whatever.
The environment, you picked that up beautifully. That's a great point that you picked up on. The environment makes a huge difference. I mean, I remember one of the issues that I've always insisted on is, one, throughout my interviews, I had two small toddlers. Well, I remember my youngest was a year old and my older one was about to turn 5 when I started working on this book. So inevitably, while I'd be conducting interviews, there would always be someone crying or wailing or wanting to go to the bathroom. And I made no excuses for it because I said, look, this is the environment that I'm working in. And every single person, I'm not joking, every single person who's in the book, no matter how glamorous they are, no matter how rich they are, they all said, you know what? It's fine. And I'll tell you why. They weren't being nice. They appreciated the fact that, look, I'm being real.
Yeah.
I'm being real, that this is the situation that I'm working in, and just bear with me because I'm trying to do my best here. And I think that's something that's very important. I remember one time I had to interview Seher Sehgal, and गर्मियाँ थी, and of course बारिशों का मौसम था, and my roof started leaking, and so I was standing there thinking, I've, two children, what am I going to do? छत में से पानी भी गिर रहा है, I couldn't leave. घर में पास, I just messaged, Seher Sehgal. I said, look, I'm really sorry. This is going to sound crazy, but I don't have anywhere to leave my kids. My roof is leaking. I can't come over right now. And she sent me the nicest message. She's like, you know what? These things happen. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Because I think
And I genuinely,
these
go
people
ahead.
have actually, before becoming who they are, or becoming these stars, they have also gone through these struggles, and these are the people who have done the work. I've read your book from cover to cover, and all of these individuals that some of them, obviously, I'll get into it later. Some of them we obviously know, they are like regular names in the fashion industry. They have actually put in the work. They didn't just
Yeah.
fell from the sky with this brand, or this status, or this money. They've actually put in the groundwork. They know, for example, if there's a designer, they know their work by hand because they have done it. And then now they are in the position, because aajkal, unfortunately, what we see, be it just not just the fashion industry, but any field, I think there's this new concept, and I think this is where these sort of profiles and stories matter, is so that people know that you can't just, it doesn't happen in days, it doesn't happen in hours, because this is the current mentality कि बस idea आ गया है, बस कल execution हो जाए, परसों जो है ना, it needs to be the it thing. It requires a lot of your time, it requires years, and it requires a lot of persistence and effort on your part, and these profiles add to that factor. And not just like the work profiles, as you mentioned, jo Colonel Saab ki aapne story share ki, that also,
Ji.
I think these sort of stories, I think we have lost a lot of such stories by not giving them the sort of status that they required, या उनको archive करने से, because to telling people कि this country was created by these people who weren't like there, कि उनको idea नहीं आया कि आओ आज जो है ना हम एक country create करते हैं. They had to go through, they saw something that was happening, and they decided that needed to do this, and they have put in a lot of sacrifice in this country. And just saying what all their efforts and sacrifices has not really panned out the way they were hoping for it to pan out, it's heartbreaking. And I think those stories need to be kept alive, ताकि the next generation, हमें तो ना 14 अगस्त हमारे, for a lot of people it's like silencer निकाल के bike चलाना, which is like, that's not why this country was made. So yeah, so these stories are very important. So just let's continue with, because you highlighted some of the profiles that you did for your book, which is A Fashion History of Pakistan. For those of our listeners who are not familiar with it as of yet, why is my big question. And if not, that you need to actually look it up. It's, I think, one of its kind. It's the first book that has sort of cataloged and archived how Pakistan's fashion industry was founded, what went into it, and also the fact, and I think, I don't know if a lot of people know this, that India's fashion industry sort of is inspired by the Pakistani fashion industry. And I will let Mehr give details on that. So Mehr, just share how did you decide? And because I have asked you this question in a separate conversation, and okay, if there will be a second volume, and you said that's not happening. So just share what made you and Saad, collaborate and come up with this book.
Absolutely. I think a second volume is necessary. and I hope someone who's listening is going to feel inspired to go out and do it. Don't be disheartened by how difficult a project is. That's where the fun lies. Believe me. Looking back now, I can see that at the time when we were going through it, it was incredibly difficult. But now I look back and I think how it has transformed me for the better. But going to your original question, Fatma, like I said, there was no eureka moment. There was no light bulb moment. We were not invited over to, the Versace mansion for dinner or anything of the sort. Nothing glamorous ever happened like that. It was a very, very ordinary morning. And it was one of those mornings where everything goes wrong. The house staff hadn't come through. I had to drop my toddler off to school. I just had a baby, and obviously I had to leave the baby at home. And I clearly remember hurtling down Main Boulevard, dropping, and I was a complete mess, even more so than I look like right now, to be honest. Hair in a bun, t-shirt covered with milk and leftover breakfast and kisi bache ki ulti, it was just insane. And I just sat there in my car thinking, oh, this is so hard. And then suddenly the car in front was another mom. She was dropping her child off. And she was dressed in a 3-piece lawn jora, 4-inch heels. This is at around 7:30 in the morning. Blow-dried hair, face packed on, and I felt bad because I was looking at myself and thinking, "Mera zara huliya zara dekho, aur unka zara huliya dekho." But Fatma, what struck me was how unhappy she looked. She looked so uncomfortable. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't happy, and I just thought, well, who is telling women to dress like this? Why should we have to dress this way to be seen? कि अब आप घर से निकल सकते हो, अब आप जा सकते हो. I mean, why? This is a country that thrives on fashion and on food. This is a country that is obsessed with marriage and children. And I'm sorry, there's nothing out there that's catering to anything. It's beyond me what the fashion industry is thinking, and of course compounded with the kya kehte hain, I suppose the feminist streak in me. It just got me thinking, I want to know what's going on. And because I'd done investigative work before, when I was working at the Friday Times newspaper, I thought, you know what, I need to find out who is telling women to dress like this. We need to get to the bottom of this. So that was it. It was just an ordinary day, looking around, observing, and something just got triggered inside of me, and that's what it. In the meantime, I had roped in Saad, my co-author, and I said, Saad, let's do this. Let's take a look. Saad himself has done groundbreaking investigative journalism. He's been published globally. Fantastic journalist and an amazing human being. And he was like, theek hai, let's do this. And so we went down the rabbit hole, and what we discovered was Fatma was heartbreaking because there were no archives. There is very little research done on the fashion industry. And today, when I look at what universities are teaching fashion students, I'm even more heartbroken. Fashion is not just about stitching and kadai ka kaam, even though that is an integral part. Yes, of course, you need to know how to stitch, you need to know the craft and all. But how will a student know that if they're designing a patiala shalwar, what the significance of that patiala shalwar is? Or if someone is doing a series of block printed outfits, how will they know what value their work has if they're not even aware of the history of the craft or the history of the art or the history of the fabric? Do you see what I mean? We are a nation of consumers, and the amount of cotton that we consume, and log kehte ji Pakistani lawn badi achhi hai, it's imported. We are importing this lawn. This is not homegrown lawn. This is not homegrown cotton. And I think so. I mean, my hope is that, and to some extent, it has been fulfilled. University students have owned the book. They love it. They're learning from it. Professors have reached out to us saying, can you share your material with us so we can create better curriculum? But I feel that so much more needs to be done, Fatima. And I really hope anyone who's listening to this, the fashion industry is not just what you see on Instagram. It's not what you see in Sunday magazines or Dawn or whatever those magazines are. It's a lot more, a lot more. And there's so much potential in there for all of you, for any one of you, male and female, and otherwise how you may want to identify yourself. Just go out there and do your research. Just go out there, look at what you see, write down your observations, come home, draw out a plan, and just do your work.
Oh, another thing that I found very interesting in the book and sort of that was quite intriguing was the fact कि जो भी आप जिस तरह भी आप as you said the archives are in a very bad shape and whatever you guys were able to retrieve from it, and I'm sure Saad has a lot more and I hope he ends up just publishing them somehow. Uh,
I'm
those
on his
archives,
case.
the work that I've seen that was being published at that time in the fashion industry, yeah, in the creative front, anyways, be it photography, fashion, makeup, whatever, was आजकल वो होगा तो वो फिर social people who do that sort of
वो
work.
ban हो जाएगा.
Exactly. And the fact that that work was being done sort of at the cusp of one of the worst dictatorships in this country, that was of Ziaul Haq, and उसके वो pander down हो रहा था. I think the 80s 90s covered है where वो वाला martial law भी recently खत्म हुआ था, but the societal impact जो हम आज तक भुगत रहे हैं अभी तक वो काफी fresh थे. मतलब I feel कि वो अभी भी काफी fresh हैं, but they were pretty fresh and these creative people were finding ways to sort of still continue and come up with these creative works and publish it and reach out to the audience that they had. And same goes for I think our television and our comedy. मतलब ज़्यादा हद के अंदर हमारी comedy shows ने काफी काफी takes लिए हुए हैं उनकी government पे. I think they were too dumb to actually censor them at before they were aired. So
लेकिन
just talk about
फातिमा,
that.
it's important to mention है, sorry मैं आपकी बात काट रही हूँ. I think it's very important for people to understand this point, and we did try to make this point in the book as well, कि ज़िया का दौर था, बिल्कुल था, and all countries go through a phase of just an economic cycle होता है ना, slump, recovery. I've forgotten, मेरी economics बड़ी बुरी है, but you know what I mean, boom, slump, recovery, disaster, whatever it is, right? In the same way, countries have a cycle as well. One of the most, it's ironic that Zia's regime was actually the most creative period of Pakistan's history.
Exactly.
In all aspects. And I'll tell you why that is. It's because when everything is being clamped down on you and you have nowhere to go, you start looking inwards and you start thinking, well, either I drown or I'm going to survive. And it's not so much a reaction as it is a survival thing. These are two different things. Reacting is different. Reacting would have been what WAF did to the Hudud ordinances. They reacted to it in a protest conduct here, and they really did it in a democratic way. But survival, all of this was survival. What are you going to do जब आप घर पे बैठे हुए हो? You're going to call up friends, you're going to start having a bit of fun, and that's how it began. That's literally how the industry began. Tariq Amin had a flat. He would have his friends over, Tappu Javeri, Fifi Harun, Rizwan Beg, the model, Lulu, or Conti, there was another model as well, Bibi, Friha Altaf. They were just a bunch of kids just hanging out with nothing else to do. There was nothing else to do. And so they decided, well, या तो हम बूथी सुझा के बैठ जाते हैं या हम कुछ करते हैं अच्छा काम, realistically. And that's what they did. They were like, we're just hanging around. अच्छा ठीक है, रिजवान ने एक जोड़ा बनाया है, great, where's the model? Okay, does anybody have a camera? Okay, let's just do a photo shoot. Let's have fun. And the same way, which is what Tanveer Jamshed TJ's, one of Pakistan's biggest brands, the first Pakistani brand to go international for Pret. TJ से भी यही किया था कि ठीक है, if you want to desexualize women to this point, आप जरूर करें. और अब मैं किस तरह करूँगा? I'll create androgynous clothing. So you have people like Marina Khan coming on screen without a dupatta, but guess what? She's got a boy cut and she's dressed in androgynous clothing. So you can't see her figure. You can't figure out ki mard hai ya aurat hai, whatever it is, but there she is in a female, pretty much carrying out a female role, and beautifully. So it was all about being creative. It was all about surviving and living, not just existing, actually living. When you have that desire to live, then you're not going to let anything get in your way. You're not going to. If you want to merely exist, by all means. But if you really want to live, you really want to feel life in no matter how limited a capacity, then you will find a way, a creative way, somehow or the other. Draw on the walls. Cavemen kya karte the?
Exactly.
Dekha jaye.
And I think these sort of things, and not just in the sense of the fashion and creative industry wali side pe, but if we look at history, everywhere during the bleakest times, even currently jo ho raha hai, which is sort of figuring out on our news feeds, the people there are finding ways of hope. And from sitting outside and from seeing all that content, and like at times I have been figuring out how can these people have any hope from what that's happening. But they are like, this is what the other party wants. They want to kill our hope, but that's not what we're going to do. So again, just adding on to the point that if you people want to live, you can either just surrender कि भाई ये ऐसा ही है कि तो बेहतर तो कुछ नहीं होना, हालात तो बेहतर नहीं होने, तो बस ऐसा ही है. But then otherwise, or you can do your part, maybe your just do. यहाँ पे असल में I think वो भी एक mentality आ जाती है where people like, what one person can do, इतना छोटे काम से क्या फायदा होगा, कितना impact तो बड़ा होना चाहिए. And I think if everybody just starts focusing on what they can individually have an impact on, even if that's on one other person, I think that can be good enough, and you have achieved your life goal.
Well, to people who say things like, what can one person do? Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, true.
Greta Thunberg. In this digital era, somebody asked me recently, how do you feel about the youth of Pakistan today? And I said, I feel so hopeful because they've got tools that we didn't have when I was their age, which is basically every single person has a smartphone in your hand. You have access to the internet. I mean, I was the generation where we had to connect our internet to the landline and then wait for MSN Messenger. और फिर डांट पड़ती थी अम्मी से कि get off, फोन करना है, मुझे बात करनी है. And you're like, अम्मा यार अभी तो आधा घंटा पहले तो आपकी बात हुई थी. But नहीं. So limited access to the internet. You have all these apps and skills. You don't even need to do digital courses now. You can create digital content just sitting at home. And honestly, this pandemic has been about nothing but time. Yeah. You've had so much time to actually sit down and do something that is not just about yourself or your life, but in terms of how it connects with other people. And if you're not utilizing this time, then let me tell you already that when things do begin to normalize, and of course it will be a new normal, you will be left behind. And you don't want to be left behind. Because then you'll have no one to blame. And that's when things will begin to go pear-shaped. Take action now. The world is at your fingertips. There are so many online courses that you can do. Just a quick, free online course. And you can learn so many new things. There are so many communities out there online. Everyone is looking for a connection. Yeah. Follow your heart, follow your dreams, do what you want to do. You're in that position right now. Why would you squander it? And for what? For just sitting? Even Netflix. I mean, when people say, I watch Netflix all day long. I'm like, yeah, but even on Netflix, look at what you're consuming. Somebody is creating that. Yeah. And they're creating it for you. Why would you not want to do the same for someone else?
Uh, I think my next, and I think this will be our sort of closing topic of discussion, is publication. And I think from what you have just said about, creating for others and seeing a gap and actually doing something instead of just cribbing about what's going on, and sort of just doing your part and see maybe inspire somebody else might get inspired and add their own version of it and it might grow from there. And there was, and this also comes from the fact that one of the key things that was in your book was the fact that a lot of the things that were happening in the fashion industry were able to be communicated. And I think you also need to add on that, how did Pakistani industry help the Indian industry develop? Wala, I would like you to share that as well. वो सारा कुछ was happening around publications. There were a lot of them. मतलब
Yeah.
just from small publications to have the key major publications जो हैं उनके supplements भी अगर आ जाएं. And unfortunately, abhi recently we have seen a lot of those uh, good publications, just frizzle out and die out. And I think you can't just blame consumers on it. I think from what I have understood from this whole scenario is the fact that they didn't really adapt to the new changing trends. They didn't digitize in time. They were not sort of
Mm-hmm.
managing
Mm-hmm.
their content accordingly. This is, I think, was a flaw that these publications had. But anyways, there are obviously other macro level factors that chipped in a lot. But we have seen all of these publications sort of die down. So how do you see, and now you have a publishing house, Musharraf Ali Faruqi has Kitab, there are a couple of others that are doing some, they're starting out small, but their presence sort of gives hope. So just share how that connects, how you saw, the impact of the lack of the publishing industry's sort of, I don't know, strength, and how do you think the current scenario or the current budding publications can add to the present and future of our local publication? Because मेरा सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम ये है कि जब से बुक्स पे import ban हुआ है, there are a lot of titles जो I have to beg friends sort of when they, अब तो traveling भी लोगों की बंद हो गई है, तो मेरी तो basically किताबें बंद हुई हैं, तो मुझे तो बहुत टेंशन है.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a, this is a sad ending, but क्या कहते हैं, Pakistan has had a very rich publishing history. Unfortunately, due to geopolitical events, economic downturns, the publishing industry has suffered badly, which caused many Pakistani authors to look towards India, where the big five are located, the big five publishing houses are located, and many others, and find get their books printed and published there. It was a good relationship. I'm proud to say that Pakistan has always been very open to India, especially when it comes to art and culture. We've always extended our hand to them, and they have reciprocated, to be fair to them. India has always been very, very warm and welcoming. So it was a good thing that was happening. And then unfortunately, the incident about Pulwama, that happened. And for the first time, Fatima, for the first time in my life, I saw that art and culture relations also had to break down, not because of antagonism, but because of political pressure from both governments. Pakistan had imposed a ban on all Indian imports that included books. And on India's side, there were these rules that if you cannot sell your product in Pakistan, then you will not stock or publish any books from Pakistan. Now, a lot of people might turn around and say, well, e-books ka kya? Nobody knew that things were going to happen, and nobody knew that the pandemic was going to happen. Up until now, it had always been a physical product, whether it was clothes, chicken curry ke kapde, kitabein, I don't know, पर्दे maybe, I don't know, सब्जियां हमारी इंडिया से बहुत आती थी. A lot of these things, physical goods. Its relationship had always been physical. When that happened, that got me thinking that, okay, fine, no, not a problem. We'll just look towards the West, and the West can publish our books. But what I discovered in the Western publishing arena is that there are these preconceived notions of what a country, particularly Pakistan, can produce and cannot produce. And there was this element of racism as well. Yes, it is sugar coated with things like, oh, well, it's a business. It has to be commercial. I get that. I get that. But then why are you putting limits on the type of books that you are going to publish? Surely in a country like the UK, where there's a huge Pakistani diaspora, there's going to be some interest in my book as a Pakistani author, as a British Pakistani author, actually. So that was the second, catalyst that got me thinking, okay, so we can't go to India. The West doesn't want us. Let's look inwards. And inwards was just a wasteland. There was exploitation, there was disregard for copyright, there was zero concept of confidentiality. And that was the third thing. And I thought, you know what, I've had enough. I'm going to set up my own. And I wouldn't call it a publishing house because I'm literally a one-woman show. I do all the work myself, whether it's picking out the paper, going to the printers, getting the layout done, the PR, the marketing, the sales, the accounts, the editing, the commissioning, everything I do myself. And so it's more like a publishing platform. I think if I call it a publishing house, that's dishonest on my part because I'm just one person. But I've had great success with it so far, thankfully. Zuka Books has not just published Pakistan's first pop culture book, which is, of course, Pakistan A Fashionable History, but it's also gone on to publish Pakistan's first non-fiction about mental health in the form of a poetry book by Zara Hamid. I've also been lucky to collaborate with the Desi Collective, a Lahore-based anthology, and it's been a huge success for the anthology titled Letters to My Inner Child, which again was a sensitive area. But again, Fatima, I don't just want to do books. I want to do books that have some connection, that when somebody reads them, when somebody holds them in their hand, they have a product of value. Which is why when people say that, oh, your books are so expensive, they're not expensive. These are books that they will stay with you for a long, long time. It's not just a novel. It's something that it's got a lesson in it. It's something you will always revert back to. And then I also feel that there's this concept that where people don't want to pay for art. My authors, every single one of them, they get a royalty per copy. I don't have any conditions where like, अच्छा ठीक है 100 बिकेंगी तो उसके बाद ये होएगा या जब मेरी print cost cover होएगी तो ये आपको तब royalty मिलेगी. Not at all. If somebody is trusting me with their work, I want to return that trust 100 times. I want their work to feel valued. Pakistani writers have not been valued at all by within Pakistan. And I see that happening when I see these original Chuftai books being sold, or when I go to the Urdu Bazaar and I see these ancient, rare books just lying there, and I think, why aren't these in a library? Why hasn't anybody made a library? What is going? Does nobody care? I mean, it's mind-boggling. Pakistanis do read books. We have Lahore has been recognized as a city of literature by UNESCO. We have some of the world's best literature festivals, the LLF Lahore Literary Festival. I mean, we are interested in the written word, but there's very little respect for it. And the two things are very different. Interest is one thing, respect is another thing altogether. And yes, I'm really happy to see other publishing houses. There's Ala Books by Tayyiba Abbas. There's Reverie by Safina Danish-Ilahi. Musharraf Farooqi ke to pehle se hi tha. And what I'm loving is that they're all female. They're all female publishers, including myself. And I think that's fascinating because it just shows that we all have our societal responsibilities. Ghar ke kaam bhi hain, naukriyan bhi hain, maa baap bhi hain, खामन भी हैं, बच्चे भी हैं, other responsibilities भी हैं. But on the other hand, we're also striving to do what we can to create an industry here at the local level for the Pakistani people. Because we are a young nation and it's high time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, until unless, just saying as you mentioned, that when you we're looking at the West has still pretty biased and they want a specific kind of work coming out of our cultures, and the stories they tell are very
And
typical
that's
and not
okay.
really
I mean, that's
always.
okay. The West,
That's all.
if they want
But
to
if
do
we
that, that's fine.
yeah, but if we I think once we internally start respecting and building an infrastructure, then they will notice. And this is how it happens everywhere. The business aspect of it is, once a local industry is established, then they see, oh, then they start thinking about the diaspora and the fact that, oh, there's an audience and there's money that they can.
Exactly. You've nailed it. You've nailed it. Until we start valuing our own writers, how can we ask anyone else to do it? Which is why when people
Yeah.
say, "Oh, West हमारे खिलाफ है," भाई
है तो है
हम
ना तो
अपने
आप
ही खिलाफ
yeah, exactly,
हम अपने
exactly.
ही खिलाफ है सबसे let's start with that. You
Yeah.
know, it's been hard selling books. It's not been easy, and it really irks me when people say things like, "Oh, you must be making so much money."
Yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah.
no. The goal isn't money here, I assure you. I assure you.
Yeah, well, on this note, again, it's sort of a sad and a hopeful note, I think. It
A
was great
realistic
talking.
note.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, and I will always, you'll be a regular on this platform, and we'll be talking about all the things that you're working on in the future. Thank you for your time, and
Thank
hopefully
you,
see you next
Fatima,
time.
for being such a staunch supporter of the written word and always being so encouraging. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you. Hafiz.
That is.